Our gospel lesson today is from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. At once, the one who had received the 5 talents went off and traded them with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have more, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the gospel of our Lord. So this parable talks about talents. And when we think of the word talent, we think of something that we have naturally, a skill, such as people talented being in music or talented in art or talented in leadership and so on. But the word talent meant something different in biblical times. Talents were the largest unit of money, and each one was worth a significant amount. It's hard to calculate the terms of our money today, but it suggests that an individual talent was worth at least a few $1,000s. Even the slave who receives the 1 talent is being entrusted with a significant amount of responsibility. Now, there's a couple of troubling things, though, in this parable. We typically hear these parables and we think of the master figure as God. But the one slave describes him as harsh, taking what doesn't belong to him. Does this sound like God? And then there's that concluding sentence that's so hard to process at first, for to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what we have will be taken away. I can understand God wanting us to use what we've been given, but taking away from those who have nothing, giving to those who already have so much. Even if we're talking about more than just money here, isn't that just a spiritual version of the poorer getting poorer and the rich getting richer? Will God take anything from those who already have nothing? So what sense can we make of this parable, and what does it tell us about being generous, thankful people? I think the parable helps us think about how we see God, how we see ourselves, and what we have, and how we respond because of what we see. Is the master in the parable meant to be God? We know what the third slave says about the master. Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid. But we have to ask, why does the slave think this? The other two slaves don't express any such feelings. Their master praises them and invites them to be part of his joy, calling them good and faithful. If the master in the parable tells us something about God, either Jesus is telling us that God is harsh and selfish, which seems unlikely, or the slave has a very skewed picture of the master. How do you see God? Is God generous? Is he giving? Does God pour out blessings? I like it that you're nodding. Is God loving and kind? In the parable, the master makes the slaves stewards of the things that belong to the master. A steward is someone who cares for something on someone else's behalf. And in biblical times, most homes would be run by the steward of the household who would manage all of the affairs of the household for the owners. God has made us stewards of the earth and all that's in it. So on one hand, we remember everything that we have really belongs to God. We're caretakers of what God has given us, and that requires our responsibility and attention. But on the other hand, we have to remember that God has let us take care of everything that belongs to God. To put someone else in charge of your household, to give someone else authority for all that is yours, it requires a deep trust. So think of all that God has entrusted to all of us. I read a story written by an author called Shane Claiborne, and he was an advocate for the poor. And in his story, he said, "I will never forget learning one of my best lessons from a homeless kid in India. Every week, we would throw a party for the street kids, 8 to 10 years old, who were homeless and they were begging to survive. One week, one of the kids I had grown close to told me it was his birthday. So I got him an ice cream cone. He was so excited, he stared at it, mesmerized. I have no idea how long it had been since he had eaten ice cream, but what he did next was brilliant. He yelled at all the other kids and told them to come over. The boy lined them up and gave each one of them a lick. His instinct was, "This is so good, I can't keep it for myself." Shane concluded, that's what this whole idea of generosity is all about. It's about realizing the good things in life, like ice cream, are too good to keep for ourselves. I see God that way. So much goodness that God just always wants to share it with us. But the third slave didn't see things that way. All he heard was, "But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away." How can you take away something from nothing? It's impossible. So maybe those who have nothing do have something after all. Maybe the point is not how much we have, but how much we think we have. The slave with the one talent had more than nothing, but he acted as though he had nothing. He did nothing with that talent. He may have looked at the other two slaves and thought, compared to them, I've got nothing. It's as if the master is saying, you had my valuable gifts in your hand, and you didn't think that they were valuable. So maybe we can better understand what Jesus is saying when we think of it this way. From those who think that they've been given nothing, what they really do have will be taken away. And from those who feel like they've been richly blessed, they'll be blessed even more. The slave with one talent didn't have nothing. He had something precious, but he just wouldn't see it. So how much do you have? Something? Nothing? An abundance? I sometimes like to joke that I've never met a rich person because no one will ever admit to being rich. Rich people are always people who have more than you have. I've read that most people say that they would be happy if they had 20% more than they have right now. The only problem is that we always say that we'd be happy with just 20% more. So that whatever we have right now is never enough. But Jesus tells us that he comes so that we might have life and have abundant, full life. Do you feel like you've received that gift? How rich are you? What do you see when you look at what God has given to you? Are your hands full or empty? Are they open to others to give, or do you grasp them tightly? In our understanding of this parable, we could associate the word talent with the gifts that God gives us. This parable tells us that God gives us all different gifts. It's not our gifts which matter, but it's how we use them. God never demands from the abilities that we don't have, but he does demand that we should use to the fullest the abilities that we do possess. The parable tells us that whatever talent we have, whether it's little or great, we need to use it to glorify God. The parable also tells us that the reward of work well done is still more work to do. The two servants who had done well weren't told to lean back and rest because they had done well. They were given greater tasks and greater responsibilities in the work of the master. It also tells us that the person who is punished is the person who won't try. The one with one talent didn't lose his talent. He simply did nothing with it. Even if he had tried and lost it, it would have been better than to do nothing with it at all. The parable lays down a rule of life, which is universally true because it tells us that those who have more will be given, and those who have not will lose even what they have. And the meaning is this: if a person has a talent and uses it, then they are progressively able to do more with it. But if the talent they have doesn't get used, they will inevitably lose it. The more we exercise and use our gifts, and the harder we work at it, the more we will be able to perfect them. Whereas if we fail to use it, we lose it. The expression goes, use it or lose it. This would actually be true of a lot of things that we do in our life, whether it's our hobbies like playing golf or playing the piano or singing songs or even writing sermons. It's a lesson of life that the only way to keep a gift is to be able to use it in the service of God and in the service of our neighbors. None of us should bury our blessings or our gifts or our talents, all that God has given to us. We shouldn't live like our generous God has been stingy with us. Thanksgiving is a day when we're reminded to count our blessings, to be mindful of all that we've received. There's no question that this is important, remembering that so many of us can be pretty ungrateful at times. But our gospel for this morning reminds us that it calls us into a careful accounting of all the ways in which we have tried to be a blessing, to be able to do something for someone. It tells us plainly that whatever our circumstances may be, that we've all been given a heart to offer, and that in God's economics, it's the investment of our heart that matters. The heart knows full well that there's all kinds of joy and laughter that we might bring. There's tremendous acts of empathy and kindness that we could ease someone else's pain, that we are all able to offer companionship to break up the loneliness and monotony of someone's day. Whether you could give these gifts abundantly or just a little isn't what matters. The question is, whom do you bless with these gifts, and whom do you bless in these ways? Because that's what matters. To share ourselves is never, ever a waste. It's always a gift. Perhaps in some small way, even an investment toward a better and more loving world. The story concedes that this is far from instinctive for us. There are times when it takes and asks a great deal, and there's times when it seems like it maybe asks too much. But the point that Jesus is making is that no matter what it takes, that kind of life offers far more, because to give of ourselves in this way will be the making of us. It's in cultivating this kind of selflessness that we finally encounter our true selves. Have you ever noticed that all of the Christmas movies usually end up with the true meaning of what the story is, that it's better to give than receive? That's ultimately what brings each one of us the most happiness. So I want to end with a little story that I read. It's by Adam Hamilton. And he said, years ago, our family took a camping trip to the Grand Tetons. We arrived on my birthday, and we set up our little pop-up camper. After we were settled, we told each of our daughters that they could have $20 spending money for the 3 days that we would be in and around Jackson Hole. We then went to the gift shop before heading out on a walk around a small lake. We had no sooner walked into the gift shop than Rebecca started looking at ball caps. She found one, tried it on, and she said, "Dad, what do you think of this hat?" I said, "Becca, it's really cool, but all you have is $20, and that hat will take all of your money. Why don't you wait and make your money last for the next few days?" But she said, "Dad, you told me it was my money and I could get whatever I want, and I really want this hat." As hard as I tried to talk her out of it and tried to convince her that she would have other opportunities to buy a cap in town, she would have no part of waiting. Finally, exasperated, I said, "Okay, Becca, but this is it. You're not getting any more money the next 3 days." I gave her the $20 and she bought the hat. We went for a walk around the lake and then came back to watch the sun set from a park bench. That's when Becca handed me the hat and said, "Daddy, I bought this for you. I love you. Happy birthday." I sat on the bench, took her in my arms, and started to cry. That hat is among my most treasured possessions, my most often worn hat to this day, because every time I wear it, I think of Becca's sacrifice for me. All these years later, it still touches me to think about how my little girl gave up all of her spending money because she wanted to tell her daddy that she loved him. That's how God looks at our acts of generosity. When we share with God, our gifts are a way of saying, "God, I'm returning to you a portion of what I have, to say thank you and I love you." When we give, we don't give because God needs what we have. We give out of love, and God, who loves us, loves our gifts. This is because of what they tell God about how we feel. This is because of what they say about our desire to be in a relationship with God. This is because of what they say about how we want to care for one another. So think about this as we go into this Christmas season. But this week we celebrate Thanksgiving. Are we being generous, thankful people? Are we using the gifts that God gives us to our best advantage and to the advantage of others? with God's help, we can still take the talent that we have, however it is, and try to be a blessing with it however we can. Our lives just don't belong to us, not only at Thanksgiving, but at any other time. And we can hope that one day, when it's time to turn in our accounts, the Lord will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. Now enter into the joy of your master." And what a Thanksgiving that will be. Thanks be to God. Amen.